And without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you my friend Tony Muschara. Tony's contributions to the field of HOP has you've helped organizations in various industries to improve safety and performance by shifting their focus on really blaming the individuals for error to understanding and really addressing the underlying systemic issues. And you bring to us, you're specialized in human and organizational performance with over 35 years of experience in consulting, training, and management positions, commercial and military nuclear power operations as well. And you're the author of some really great books, and I implore you, our listeners today, to take some time to read those, which are, one of the books is Risk-Based Thinking, so managing uncertainty of human error in operations. And you're a lead author of the Critical Steps Managing what must go right in high-risk operations as well, and retired captain with the U.S. Navy. And we thank you, sir, for your service.
Thank you.
And the floor is yours.
Okay. Let's see. My view options just disappeared on me. Okay. Share screen. All right.
So I'm going to stop my share there. There you go.
Yeah, I need to go back to the beginning here. There we are. So we good to go now?
Yes, sir.
All right. And let's see. Okay. So just as Jordan had mentioned in the intro, this is a third in the series. And the first two that I'd like to talk, or the first two were associated with critical steps. The second one was on risk-based thinking, and this one is on systems learning. Just let me go ahead and just kick this off by saying that organizations, such as the ones that you all are members of, are made up of people, groups of people, and the equipment that is used doing things together, all the parts interacting, functioning to produce some desired business results, to create value for the organization. And the illustration there in the inset on the slide, the input, and then the A is the throughput, and then there's some output that the system produces. Then there's some feedback to the system to make appropriate changes in the throughput, and so this is representative of a system in its entirety. But we're going to talk to some extent. We're going to do some unpacking of that throughput A, which I'm going to refer to as systems thinking. So system thinking, it surpasses your conventional cause and effect linear thinking. X causes Y, Y causes Z, in its ability to help managers understand how performance happens. And so I want to offer or introduce as a framework for manager thinking. This is about thinking how to think better, or how to think more deeply and more broadly about what's really happening in your organization, by considering connections and interactions between people and other parts of the system. Now, I just give another caveat here. This is not about systems learning or systems thinking in total. You're not going to learn everything you want to know about these two topics in this 50 minutes or so webinar. But I'm going to cover this topic by focusing on how it applies to human performance in the workplace. So the bottom line is when things don't go right, or when things don't go as expected, systems thinking helps explain the difference. And here's a key point to remember. Systems thinking helps explain the difference between work as done in the workplace and work as planned. Sometimes people refer to as work as imagined, but I like the idea of work as planned. So typically, and that's normally the case, that work as done is typically different from work as planned. So let's just jump right in here. So again, I'm just giving you the context of this presentation. We've talked about critical steps in our first webinar. Secondly, we talked about risk-based thinking. Today, we're talking about learning systems learning in particular regarding how to manage H&OP. So first thing we need to talk about what a system is. And as you see there in the background, there's what looks like an old four-door sedan. In fact, it's a 1953 DeSoto sedan, which was my first car. That was my first car when I got my driver's license back in the 60s. In fact, it was my grandmother's vehicle. So I purchased that vehicle from her for $60, and it ran like a charm. But anyway, an automobile, the cars and is a whole system. It's made up of several interconnected parts. As a matter of fact, today a typical vehicle has more than 10,000 parts, all fitted together in order to produce an outcome. And a human similarly is made up of several parts. We're made up of cells and systems and organs, muscles that are all interconnected to form a person. And we're going to talk about the essential property of a system. The essential property of the system is its ability to achieve its purpose. For an automobile, the essential purpose or the essential property of an automobile, when everything is connected and fitted and working together, is to transport you from one place to another. That's the purpose. Notice wheels cannot. They don't have that property. By themselves, they cannot transport you. The chassis or the engine or the brakes, none of those taken separately or individually can perform what the whole system can do. And so if you take apart a car, the 10,000 parts or so, and pile those parts up in the driveway, you no longer have a system. And some people say that a system is the sum of its parts. Well, that's not right. A pile of parts in the driveway is you can consider that a sum, but they're not connected. But if you take one part, if you're all connected, but if you take one part away, or if the part doesn't fit, the purpose cannot be achieved. So fundamentally, that's why I list purpose here on the right side of your slide. That's the primary distinctive characteristic of a whole system, because without one of these parts, it doesn't fulfill its purpose. Now, another part, a term that I'll use periodically is called structure. Structure. Right here, you can see in the illustration a structure where there's parts, there's connections, and there's feedback. And so when we talk about structure, I'm basically talking about all the parts and their connections and the pathways for feedback. And then I talk about leverage. I'm not going to spend much time on leverage, and actually I shouldn't have listed that here. But leverage is identifying which parts have the most leverage or most impact on the system performing its purpose. And probably out of here you can tell that the operator has the most leverage on the ability of the automobile to perform its function or its purpose. And then there's things called stocks and flows. There's the transfers of energy. There's transfers of material like gasoline from the gas tank into the engine. And primarily when we're talking about systems thinking, we're going to be talking about transfers of information, ideas, values, and so on. And so that's an important part of any system as well. And you can apply this concept to human beings as well. We all are organisms, and as organisms we have life. And I would encourage you in the last slide, going deeper, I share a link to a presentation by Dr. Russ Akoff. And he describes this, and using his words, he says, none of our body parts separate from the organism have life. You, as an organism, can write. Your hand cannot write. It's easy to demonstrate. Cut your hand off, put it on the table, and see what it does. It can't do anything. It's only if it's connected to the organism in order to write. Your eyes can't see, but you can see. You can think. Your brain doesn't. So that gives you the focus. That's suggesting that if you take one part and just analyze that one part out of context, you're not going to see what's really going on. So let's unpack systems learning. A system fundamentally is a set of parts assembled and fitted together to accomplish a desired purpose. All right, and we've made that clear. But what do we mean by learning? Systems learning, and fundamentally, it's a change in behavior of a system by aligning or realigning its structure towards purpose. And remember, when I mentioned structure, I'm talking about the parts and their connections and the pathways for feedback. And so what the learning is focused on making success more likely, reducing the likelihood of failure. And learning can occur relative to the past. It can be present. Usually that's called situation awareness. But for the most part, we're going to be talking about learning going forward, the corrective actions, preventive actions going forward. So what does systems learning look like? It has three parts: detection, when there's a misalignment in your system such that you're not accomplishing your purpose as intended, or you're missing the mark on your purpose. The second part is understanding why you're seeing what you're seeing, and that's where systems thinking comes into play. And then finally, once you understand the system and why you're seeing the outcome and the properties of this system, then you can make corrections or realign that system to get what you want, make success more likely, and reduce the likelihood of failure. So the difference between systems learning, systems thinking is that middle portion of the systems learning process. So again, what is systems thinking? This is a management discipline of understanding system performance as an outcome. Sometimes we talk about emergence. So this is understanding system performance as an outcome of connections and interactions between the parts of the system, seeing the whole structure to help us understand how things are really working. All right. So why are we talking about systems thinking? And this is a relatively famous quote by W. Edwards Deming. He said, if you put a good performer in a bad system, the system will win almost every time. All right. So good people cannot outperform the constraints of the system in which they're performing. And that's an important element, an important feature of why we're talking about systems thinking as part of our learning process. And here's an interesting statistic. In the United States, back in 1975, there were more than 44,000 fatalities on the highways and byways in the United States. And compare that to 2013, and there was a dramatic decrease in the number of fatalities to just less than 33,000. But what's interesting is the number of licensed drivers went up from 1975. We're talking about close to 130 million licensed drivers to more than 212 million licensed drivers in 2013. And an interesting thing is people did not change. All right, the focus of the improvement was not on the people per se, but on the system. And there's various parts of the system. There are the vehicles, there's the highways, there's the manufacturing of the vehicles, and so on. So a number of things changed in the system, but people didn't change dramatically. We all still make mistakes. So manage the system is probably the key message from this. So I want to just briefly introduce this idea of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, because the context of all these systems that we set up to manage performance of our organizations operate in a VUCA environment. But this is an illustration from Jens Rasmussen's work from 1997, a document an article he wrote called "Risk Management in a Dynamic Society: A Modeling Problem." And basically the point in the middle there is where we operate, and there's a lot of margin for safety, margin for profitability, margin for workload and so on, but there's always constraints and there's always burdens placed on the operator at any one time. And so there's always economic pressure and productivity pressure. There's workload pressure that's influencing the performance of the individual. And so we consume the margin, so to speak, towards safety of the assets of our organization, which the solid line represents failure or injury or loss, whereas the dotted line represents your administrative limits typically. So our margin for error becomes less and less as more of the economic pressures and workload pressures come to bear in the workplace. So managers and executives tend to be overly optimistic about their systems. And I typically ask these questions in a face-to-face conversation with clients. And I ask them, true or false, facility systems are flawlessly designed and scrupulously maintained. True or false? Same thing here. Designers foresee, engineers foresee and anticipate all contingencies. All right. Or thirdly here, procedures are always complete, correct, available, and usable for every occasion. And then finally, people behave always as they are expected to. And we know in every case, the answer is false. All right. And so the idea here is that systems are rarely trouble-free. We're saying with the first assumption there that the plant is in effect safe. In the second point there'll be no surprises in the workplace, and every job. Third, when we say procedures are complete and correct, available, etc., we're saying that every job is routine, and people. This last one, they always act the way they're trained to act. And again, these are not true. And so that introduces a lot of variability and uncertainty in the workplace. So managers tend to be optimistic, overly optimistic, I should say, about the efficacy and the effectiveness of their systems. All right. And those systems are designed by people, built by people, and because of human fallibility, they're gonna have some faults or flaws associated with those systems. And because of that, when things don't go right, here's the conditions before mishap. Some things may not go right, but then something happens here in the middle, and there's a tendency by managers to ignore those other features of the system and highlight the individual performer. They should have known better, so to speak, and they take that person out of context. And remember what I said about a system. If you take a part out of context, remove it from the system, and you try to change that part, you're typically not going to have any real influence or improvement of the system as a whole. So here's another way of looking at systems thinking. I'll be honest with you right now, I can't remember where I got this illustration, and I should look that up. I've been searching for it. By the way, I was talking with Jordan a little while ago, and my co-author Jim Marinas and myself, we're in the process of writing a third book in the series on systems learning. So this is a key present illustration that we'll be using in that book, and we anticipate that being published in late 24, probably a year from now. But the issue here I want to share with you is, what are the symptoms? Usually our key performance indicators, these KPIs, and symptoms are characteristic of whether or not the purpose of the system is being accomplished. And then we can look over time and see, okay, what are the patterns of behavior that related to those indicators, those leading or lagging indicators and those symptoms, and what does it look like over time? And then we can start asking questions, better questions or deeper questions on the structure of the system that gives rise to this outcome here, these top two levels of our pyramid. And typically managers make decisions, they manage their team or manage their operations based on their mental models, their concepts of what causes what and why. And fundamentally, we're talking about theory. And if too many times I've gone to organizations and talked to the managers, and they get tired of hearing about theory. Well, if they don't understand the theory, they may not understand what they're doing, and their management decisions may be suspect. So it's important for them to have a clear understanding of the structure of the system before making any changes to that system to redirect or realign that system towards its purpose. All right. So here's an interesting POSIWID. POSIWID is purpose of a system is what it does. And so these KPIs and systems, these patterns of behavior, this is what the system's doing. And so it's better to understand what the system is doing before making any changes. And we've talked about in past webinars, talking about the sharp end versus the blunt end. And just as a reminder, the work as done in the workplace, that's the sharp end. That's where people come in direct, frequent contact with operating systems and the technology to create value. And then the blunt end is work as planned. And this is the design, the procedures, the training, the budgeting, the resources, et cetera, that's done at an organizational level. So I said earlier that work as done is rarely the same as work as planned. And if you have recurring and mismatches between work as done and work as planned, that means there's some misalignments in your organization. And systems thinking, which is the second part of our systems learning process, explains that difference. All right. So a strong systems thinking approach to problems will help you explain why there's a different or persistent difference between work as done and work as planned. So here, this is perhaps the most important slide of the deck. And this is the framework that I want to introduce that I'd like managers to consider going forward relative to systems thinking. But there's three levels. There's I mentioned the blunt end and the sharp end. And so the sharp end is where all the work happens. This is where we create value. And up here at the top is the blunt end. And these are what I refer to as the organizational factors. And notice the word structure. Structure is where all the parts are created and arranged and fitted and built such that we can create the conditions for work being done safely and effectively and efficiently. But what's in the middle? Middle is what we call local factors. And I'm going to unpack that here in a minute. But managers fundamentally are managing local factors. They're not necessarily managing the work per se. They're creating the conditions that people work in. That's what they're really managing. And so I'll explain those here in a minute. But human performance is never simple. Performance, especially failure, always involves complex relationships between people and processes, people and technology, people and machines, people and other people. And that's a quote from one of Todd Conklin's books. So what we're looking for here is the alignment or degree of fit between the organization and the work. For instance, training. Do people out here at the sharp end who have the skills and knowledge is the training function providing the needed knowledge and skills for the work to be done with the technology in the workplace. So I just want to mention that this illustration is a mental model, and mental models are oversimplifications of reality. So no mental model is entirely accurate, but this mental model will help managers think, ask better questions. Systems thinking attempts to understand work as done in context. And so the work as done down here at the sharp end is within the context of these local factors, which I'll unpack here in a moment. So these are the conditions people work in. And so that's that. The local factors is a key element between the organization and at the blunt end and work at the sharp end. All right. And here's another way of looking at this. Over here on the left, design. Organizational factors include design, work as planned, which create the local conditions for the worker to complete the work as done. And rarely do these two rarely are these two the same. And systems thinking will help explain why these are different. And one thing I want to make sure you understand, we're talking about flows of energy, matter, or information. Primarily down here at the sharp end, people, workers, frontline workers are interacting with energy and matter, solids, liquids, and gases in order to create value. But as the farther you get away from the workplace, the transition of flows is more informational, ideas, values, priorities, and so at an organizational level, we're tending to look at the flows of information rather than flows of energy and matter at the workplace. So I love this Larson cartoon, Far Side cartoon. And this shows the influence of organization, the blunt end, on operations at the sharp end. And you can see these two Viking supervisors at the front of the ship, and one says to the other, "I've got it too, Omar. A strange feeling like we've been going in circles." And so obviously the ship is not accomplishing its purpose because of the design of the organization, how they organize the workforce. Interesting. So what do we mean by organizational factors? This is just a generic list of functions that happen in most any industrial organization. And you can see elements are different. These functions in any of those organizations, they may be organized differently, but they're all present. And now here, basically, let me go back. So managers are managing these systems. These systems, we have a work management system, we have a budgeting and resource allocation system, construction and maintenance system, and so on. And what these do is create the conditions that the operator at the sharp end works in. These are influences, expectations, and supervisory feedback. Cell 1, cell 2. Typically, I see this illustrated as a table, basically a table of 6 cells. And that's why I use the phrase cell. And cell 2, tools, resources, job site conditions that the operator is working in. And then cell 3, what are the incentives and disincentives? And what we're talking about here is these are the conditions in the here and now. Physically where the operator is and at that time. And the idea, some of you probably already know about local rationality, and this is what Sidney Dekker was fundamentally talking about when he said that the frame of reference for understanding people's ideas and their decisions should be their own local work context, the context in which they are embedded. And I'll say another thing about that by Dr. James Reason in the 1990s said something about that, and I'll mention that later. But local rationality is people did things that made sense to them at the time. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. And so that context is, I'm trying to illustrate that context with these 6 cells. All right. And so these 6 cells help us understand and ask better questions about what was going on when that person did what he or she did. All right. So here's another way of looking at the systems thinking framework. I add some examples here from organizational factors, local factors, and then I show the interface with assets, the work outputs from work. And typically we're talking about changes, creating value or creating value with people, product, and property. And the organization designs the work as planned, and also they design the technology, and they put in place constraints in order to protect assets in most cases. And we call those defenses, or defense in depth, controls, barriers, and safeguards. And so those are put in place before we actually do the work. Another way to think about systems thinking. And now we talk about behavior at the sharp end. And we have expectations. We have policies, procedures, work plans, skills, expectations, a number of things that we put in place, standard operating procedures in order to accomplish work as planned. But things don't always go right. Things come up that we don't anticipate. And so frontline workers have an opportunity to adapt to their work setting and make decisions and perform things, perform work in a way that'll accomplish the work. An interesting study was done in the healthcare industry, particularly hospitals, and studies of nurses in the hospital context. And it turned out that out of all the unusual circumstances that a nurse encountered, they only stopped work to get help 10% of the time. 90% of the time, they made trade-offs. They worked around a problem without asking for help or stopping work. And so that's something to consider when you have people doing high hazard type work. When do you want them to stop? When do you want them to ask for help? When is it okay to proceed and adapt to a situation to accomplish the mission of the organization? And then there's occasions when people make at-risk choices. They're reckless, or they make assumptions that are not based on reliable information, or they take shortcuts. And the last example there is they write NA or not applicable in a procedure without any technical authorization, without any technical understanding of what they're doing. So those are probably the most common behavior choices that you would see in the workplace. But again, let me emphasize, people do things that make sense to them at the time. So there's influences, there's context, which systems thinking is going to help us unpack when we do the analysis of trying to understand better why people do what they do. So here's a different way of looking at the same systems thinking inverted pyramid model. I call this the alignment model. And some people find this is more useful. It's more of a list, a sequence. It looks more like a process if you think about it. But organizational factors create local factors. Those local factors form the context for people's choices and actions in the workplace. And those choices or those actions that they perform have outcomes. There's outcomes that they produce, what we call work outputs. And then when all those work outputs are bound together, they produce the business results for the organization. But if you're not getting the business results, before I say that, let me illustrate this. I mentioned structure before. Those are the parts of the system and how they're interconnected and the feedback. And so fundamentally, the organizational factors and local factors form the structure of your system, which in turn together influence people's behavior choices. And then the choices and the work outputs, we can plot those over time. We can look at variables and look at the amount of work that's been done, or the amount of work that's had, a number of events that you've had in a particular type of activity. That's called behavior over time. That's what BOT represents. And then your business, and managers generally measure their business results with KPIs, key performance indicators. But I was about to mention, if this R1 is not what you want a new R2, well, what do you have to do? You have to change all the preceding factors or conditions or actions preceding this business result. So if you want a new R2, you have to have a new W2, work outputs. And that means different behaviors. There would be a B2. And then the local factors, this would probably be the primary change element of system learning, is changing local factors. Hopefully everybody heard me on this. Systems learning doesn't happen until behavior changes. even though, gaining new knowledge is part of the learning process, but for an organization, lessons learned are not learned until behavior changes, and managers, their primary driver or source of leverage is going to be local factors, and those local factors are a function of organizational factors. So again, here's another way of looking at these elements. Work as done is items 3 and 4. Work as planned is items 1 and 2. All right. So we generally plan work using, creating 1 and 2, but what's really happening in the workplace is 3 and 4. Okay, I mentioned this pyramid earlier, and I'm just throwing in the systems thinking side by side with it, and you can kind of see the relationship here. I know, maybe maybe I need to invert one or the other just to make them parallel, but the KPIs and systems, patterns of behavior, that's representative of the work that's being done. And then the structure of the system is a combination of the organizational factors and the local factors. These together form management team's mental model. And so one of the benefits of systems thinking is not only changing the structure of your system for improving the organization, but it also changes the way managers think, the mental models they use to make decisions. So what do we mean? Systems learning, up and out. This is a phrase that was made popular by Dr. Sidney Dekker. And going back to our three parts of systems learning: detect, understand, and correct. And the first part, detection, this is discovery, identifying a performance gap, performance issue. There's a gap between what you want and what you're getting. And we look at patterns and persistent variations between work as done, work as planned, KPIs, and so on. So the next phase is understand the system. Pinpoint that system's purpose and its essential parts. How do you know you have an essential part? An essential part is if you take that part away from the system, will it be able to perform its function? For instance, if I take a wheel off of an automobile, it will not be able to, the automobile will not be able to perform its function. So that's, the wheel is an essential part. Then characterize your interactions and flows between these parts. This is where you ask questions. You're asking questions, what if type questions, and looking at how they can vary. How can the performance of individual parts, how they can vary during performance or during operations. And then map the system structure. Now, a lot of your publications on systems thinking, there's a lot of emphasis on causal loop diagrams. I'm a proponent. I encourage organizations to learn how to do that, but it doesn't necessarily have to have all the archetypes. You hear about archetypes, and I kind of push back on that. But basically, drawing pictures. What influences what? What part drives another part? And basically just draw pictures, using the arrows. Back when I was in the submarine service, when we talked about radiological controls in a submarine, because all the nuclear submarines in the U.S. Navy are driven by nuclear power plants, we would use this thing called RADCON math, radiological controls mathematics. And it was just basically looking at cause effect between different parts of the radiological conditions of a system. And so if something goes up, something goes down, and if that goes down, then something goes up, etc. And so we just started drawing maps using RADCON math to better understand where the sources of radiation might be coming from. And then once you have a map where you've speculated a structure, now we can validate it. Will it accomplish the purpose? Let's just check alignment and fit of the parts. And so again, it offers another opportunity to ask questions. All right, so you've come up with a tentative map, and you validated it. Here's what's happening. Here's how the parts, in particular human performance, is functioning within this system. Now we can learn. We can make some corrections. We realign the system, the organization, and local factors. Basically, we're tuning your system. We're retuning the system and making adjustments to the system to get more of what we want and less of what we don't want. That's fundamentally what we're doing. And then your corrective action, preventive action process must have accountability. All right. I talk about time at risk. And when I say time at risk, it's when the condition, an adverse condition in the system is born, and that adverse condition, a latent organization or a latent system weakness exists. Until it's resolved, until it's corrected, the system is at risk. And so, you want accountability in achieving resolution of these weaknesses in your system to minimize that time at risk. And I'm a big proponent of effectiveness reviews. Maybe 6 months after the corrective actions have been incorporated, is the purpose being achieved with these corrective actions? And that's what an effectiveness review. I'm sure the audience is familiar with those. So systems learning is 3 parts: detection or discovery, understanding the system, and then correction or learning. Systems thinking is embedded in the second part, which is going to help us understand how the system is operating. So I mentioned Dr. James Reason earlier regarding local factors, and he's quoted in his book, 1997 book, Managing the Risks of Organizational Accidents. He says it is easier to manage the conditions humans work in than to change the human condition. And what are those conditions? We're talking about local factors. And then Russ Akoff, I like this quote by Dr. Russ Akoff. He says, the only thing harder than starting something new is to stop something old. And this is a function of local factors again. So if there are some local factors that are reinforcing at-risk behavior, then you better get rid of those local factors and replace them with local factors that reinforce or encourage safer or safe behavior. So what are the takeaways? This is a concluding slide for the presentation, and we'll open it up for some questions, hopefully with some answers. First thing is systems learning has 3 parts: detection, understanding, and followed with correction. And again, I want to make the point here, systems learning doesn't happen until behavior has changed. Systems thinking is focused on helping managers understand the system, understand their organization, by understanding the flows of influence between and within the organization and the workplace. It helps to understand performance as an outcome of interactions between parts. All right. Secondly, this is local rationality by Dr. Sidney Dekker. People do what makes sense to them at the time. People's choices, people's behavior choices are context driven. And so it's important for managers to understand the context. Remember the six cells that we talked about, the 6 categories of local factors. And then systems thinking helps explain the difference between work as done and work as planned. That suggests that there's misalignments in the system structure that is promoting this difference. And in an extreme case, we're talking about drift. I'm sure most of you have heard of this concept of drift, where people's performance over time drifts from expectations, and usually there's a problem in the system that's promoting this persistent difference between work as done and work as planned. And from a disadvantage perspective, systems thinking is not necessarily intuitive at the beginning, and it takes time to understand and become proficient. But systems thinking, I think, is the way to go. And if managers, including human performance specialists and the root cause and analysts. If you don't understand how your organization works, then your corrective actions are going to be suspect and likely not effective over the long term. So the third point, it's all about tuning. System learning is about tuning and realigning the system towards purpose. And only when the behavior of the system changes, including the people that are part of that system, then learning occurs. So here's some references to go deeper. Obviously, I'm not covering the waterfront with going any deeper than what we just talked about. But here's some references that I've used that are being used between Jim and I as far as to write this next book on systems learning. But I encourage everyone to go to this link and listen to this. I think it's about a 30-minute talk, 20 to 30-minute talk by Russ Akoff. And there's the link there. And he does an excellent job of explaining systems and systems thinking. So I'm going to close there and open it up. Jordan, if anyone has any questions, you want me to leave it here? Or you want me to stop sharing?
If you can stop sharing, that'd be great. And then I'll bring up our Q&A slide here.
Stop share. There we go.
All right, everyone, this is the opportunity to ask some questions. Maybe I'll lead off. Given the dynamic and evolving kind of nature of any kind of modern workplace, what is one thing tomorrow that an organization can do to really, make one step forward in system learning?
Systems learning. I would say, going back to that one slide, that systems thinking inverted pyramid, is introduce that concept to your management team. The concept that what people are doing in the workplace is a function of context. All right. And introduce the local factors to your management team, in particular, those six categories. There's a group of people associated with the International Society for Performance Improvement, ISPI, and there's a host of academics that have developed what is known as human performance technology. And what I shared with you is a microcosm of human performance technology, with the blunt end, the local factors, and then work behavior. And that was validated with a book by Dr. David Woods out of Ohio State, called Behind Human Error. And so if you get the second edition of David Woods' book, you can validate that inverted pyramid illustration. But I'd say that illustration will help managers start asking better questions right away.
Yeah, I think that's it's interesting when you just think of that. Like I mentioned in our when we just started, that prior to everyone coming into this webinar, it's interesting when you think about how we optimize and we look at the lens of system learning and integrating human and organizational performance. And really what we were saying was, hey, we were looking at a particular task. Maybe it's confined space work, right?
Right.
And how complex that can really be. And, sometimes we have people making these plans that are not they actually haven't done the work in some instances, right? So it's just integrating this understanding, like you mentioned, those local conditions that are really going to build up that worker and doing that.
And who knows those local conditions better than the operator or the worker?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why you got to get those people involved.
Yes, I think that it really, that interconnectedness of these elements really do enhance the effectiveness of, your organization, and working safer, and, at the end of the day, being profitable as well, getting people home safely. So, all right. Does anyone else have any other questions before we move on here? All right, we have if you have any questions afterwards, please reach out to Energy Safety Canada at safety@energysafetycanada.com.
Can I add to that?
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, my slide deck has my contact information on it, and so feel free to send me an individual email if you like.
Thank you so much for that, Tony.